So I want to talk a bit about the people that we're here to honor tonight. Adolf Rosenblatt was not born in Milwaukee. He was born in Connecticut. Came here in 1966 and was on the faculty of WM for a very long time. And that means he spent most of his life in Milwaukee and most of his life as an East Sider. And he has immortalized the East Side in some fairly monumental works of art. And you saw the one, those were at the reception, saw the Oriental drugstore, the pharmacy counter, as well as the Oriental, kind of the bleachers up there, the movie theater as well. So he really has kind of put that into permanent form in clay. And Steve Solocheck was a West Sider. He was a 1961 graduate of Washington High School, which you will see later in the show. Somebody who was at 5'8", gifted point guard, and basketball was kind of he was not a center at 5'8". So he was someone who was a gifted athlete, cut short by multiple sclerosis, but certainly a proud West Sider. And then when somebody recalled the counterculture getting kind of started back in the 1960s, he became an East Sider. He spent some time over on this side of town. So what I want to talk about tonight is the different sides of Milwaukee. And if you spend even a couple of weeks here, you pretty much get a sense of the sidedness of Milwaukee. There is an east, there is a west, there is a north, there is a south. And how those all developed is certainly the result of the Milwaukee area's history. And going way back, what I want to do is kind of get the foundations of those sides, at least the major ones. We're going to miss the south side tonight, spend more time on the east and west sides. But the foundations of all those sides and the neighborhoods that were ingrained, embedded in all of them. So to begin with, Milwaukee is here because we have the best natural harbor on the western shore of Lake Michigan. That's why Milwaukee exists. At a time when everybody got here by water, you had to have a good port, and Milwaukee had a great one, Chicago not accepted. So we had one harbor, and that's why we're here, but we also had three rivers that joined at the confluence, the river mouth itself, and that became the occasion for some fairly serious line drawing very early on. You have on the east side Solomon Juneau, who was a French-Canadian fur trader, comes here back in 1818 and lays claim to what becomes Milwaukee's east side, and stayed to become Milwaukee's first mayor. A really interesting transitional figure. A guy who was here when it was a wilderness and became the mayor when Milwaukee incorporated back in 1846. You also have the West Side's founder, Mr. Sunshine, here. This is Byron Kilbourne, Connecticut-born Yankee who arrived here back in 1834, claimed the West Side because Juneau had control of the East Side. And just to round things out, you had a native Southerner founding Milwaukee's South Side, appropriately. And that is George Walker, who had a little cabin on the end of a little point of land down what's now the end of the South Water Street Bridge. So you had these three guys who didn't get along especially well, each of whom thought he should be the founder of what would become Central Milwaukee. So if you look at the midline there, Wisconsin Street, that's where Juneau's cabin was. Up on the north, Chestnut Street is where Kilbourne's was. And you can see the little point of land down there on the south side. And that's where Walker's Point was. It actually was a point, a little peninsula, maybe 12 feet high, 2 or 3 blocks long, not much. And that was quickly erased to fill in the abundant swampland that was the major topographic feature in central Milwaukee back in those early years. So you had those three settlers, and because Walker had title problems, he did not have clear title to his land, so he couldn't sell lots to settlers with any clear assurance of title until 7 years after he had moved there. That let the east and west sides fight it out, and they did. This is a map of, as you see, the city of Milwaukee, purportedly, from 1836, published by Byron Kilbourne. What's missing? There is no east side. So this is a west side, piece of west side propaganda. And back then, Milwaukee had very few residents. This was intended to entice settlers and capital to come to Byron Kilbourne's west side, which he believes should be the center of the metropolis. And that rivalry finally came to the head over the issue of bridges. The east side succeeded in having one built back in 1840. It was now Juneau Avenue, ironically, then it was Chestnut Street. And it went right past, or about a block away from Kilbourne's house. And they liked it so well, they built 2 more downstream by private subscription. And the West Siders suffered in silence for a time, but one warm night in the summer of 1845, night like tonight, they took axes and hatchets and liberated their side of the drawbridge, which collapsed the span into the Milwaukee River, blocking traffic coming north, blocking the east side's access to the rest of the world. So the east side's patriots responded by cutting off the west side bridges to the south. So for a while, no one could get anywhere in downtown Milwaukee. It was like, I don't know, maybe Rufus King and Riverside on Friday nights, kind of football rivalry, or Washington and Marshall up on the west side. They finally realized that they were scaring people away, so in the end of January 1846, all 3 sides joined forces as the city of Milwaukee. And those sides remained fairly intact for a time, but at least Milwaukee was one community on paper. And there is one legacy of that period that's still very much with us, because there was no reason to lay out Milwaukee's street systems to conform to each other, the east and west sides of the river. Before there were bridges, Pilgrim went his way, Juneau went his. So when they finally linked east and west sides, the bridges joined at an angle that was part of the landscape of Milwaukee going way back to the 1840s, and is still part of the landscape today. This is not going to be rationalized anytime soon. So this is going to be part of our landscape for the foreseeable future. So Milwaukee became, based on those early geographic divisions, a city of sides, and each had its own assortment of neighborhoods. And I'm going to kind of briefly trace the east, north, and west side's history. Here you can see the frontispiece of the neighborhood book. And it helps to think of Milwaukee's development, or any cities, as kind of a very slow, extended Big Bang. Begin with this burst of energy in the heart of town. In Milwaukee's case, that's the corner of Water Street and Wisconsin Avenue, which is where the Juneau cabin was. And that energy kind of expands out in all directions except east in our case, because there's a lake there. It's not going to move out in that direction. And you have kind of the DNA that develops in the heart of town that carries in these vectors all the way out into, some cases, the suburbs. And you can see that fairly clearly in Milwaukee's evolution all the way into the adjoining counties. So here's the east side of Milwaukee, which was Adolph Rosenblatt's home, and a great hangout for Steve Solocheck as well. It's interesting that in a city with 100 square miles, the east side contains only 4 square miles. It's only 4% of Milwaukee's land area, and you wouldn't think that. It has kind of an outsized role in Milwaukee's culture, and kind of its image and self-image. And the dominant pattern on the east side, in terms of its history, is a settlement of wealth near the lake and working class near the river. Well, those 2 contrasts were there early, and you can still see them persisting in the landscape in 2017. And that's embodied in the stories of 3 quite different neighborhoods. You have, first of all, the Lower East Side, and the Oriental Theater is out here in the museum. So the main lobby, the main foyer of the Jewish Museum, so you'll see that. The patrons immortalized in clay by Adolph Rosenblatt. It's the area south of North Avenue, and where it begins is a neighborhood called Yankee Hill, which is kind of the northeast side of downtown, around Juneau, Astor, the Knickerbocker Hotel, Astor Hotel, that section of downtown. And back in those days, this was uniformly Anglo-Saxon, and Yankee back in those days covered a multitude of sins, largely people of Anglo-Saxon background, somewhere east of Chicago, so it was a pretty elastic term. And they built homes that reflected their success economically. This was George Miller's house, who married Timothy Appleton Chapman's daughter, T.H. Chapman's. Well, they've been here for a while. It's all kind of the carriage trade department store down there in 400 East Wisconsin. But he was doing okay in his own right. He was a partner in a firm called Miller, Mack & Fairchild. Anyone know what that is today? It's Foley & Lardner, which goes back to 1842. And these are Anglo-Saxons who had Anglo-American faiths. You have Emmanuel Presbyterian here, St. Paul's Episcopal, All Saints Episcopal, Summerfield Methodist, First Unitarian. So all these Anglo-Protestant faiths. What you did not see there was Catholics, Protestants, or Catholics and Jews. Those are the 2 groups who were completely absent from that section of town. And they were the immigrants, and they were people who lived someplace else in Milwaukee. Lutherans as well. They were the Germans or Norwegians. So you have this sort of internal diversity of the Yankee establishment here in Milwaukee. And as time went on, the economy continued to boom, and you have kind of this movement out from Yankee Hill, kind of squeezed up the lakeshore, Prospect Avenue, right outside the door here. This became kind of a King's Row lined with mansions, one of the finest rows of mansions in the Midwest, not unlike Summit Avenue in St. Paul or Euclid in Cleveland. Kind of the same pattern. You have this concentration of wealth. In Milwaukee's case, they were attracted by the prospect of the lake, this great view of the lake. And they lined Prospect with some fine, fine homes, most of which are gone. This is Charles Ray's home, who was a grain merchant and banker. And by this time, you begin to see some infiltration of European groups into that Yankee establishment, especially Germans, some Irish, and some German Jews as well. So you have families like the Friends and the Adlers, who were nationally important clothing manufacturers, the Benjamins, who were Milwaukee's largest coal dealers. They had homes on Prospect and nearby, and were very much a part of that kind of generalized German aristocracy. On the river, something really different was happening, and this goes back to the 1840s when Byron Kilbourne put a dam across the Milwaukee River just south of the North Avenue Bridge, before there was a bridge there. It didn't happen until the 1870s. And he intended it as the head of water for a canal that would have linked his west side with the Mississippi River and ultimately New Orleans. So he thought of this as being kind of the door, the riches of the West. He had a habit of making enemies, as you might have told from his photograph. You know, this was not somebody who played well with others. And the legislature cut his canal short after he finished 1.25 miles. That's all he got done. So the Kilbourne Canal became a Stillborn Canal. He had a plan B, and that was to use the water power behind that dam as a source of hydraulic energy for Milwaukee's first industrial district. So you have, actually this picture is a bit deceptive. The water on the left-hand side, that's the canal. And the water to the right there is the Milwaukee River. So you had this fairly dependable source of year-round water. You know, you had to keep it going during the wintertime with the ice tried to threaten it. But this area was just called the water power, capital W, capital P. It was an address. You could have mailed a postcard to someone who would have gotten there on the water power. And it was lined with flour mills and sawmills and in time tanneries. So this, long before there was Menominee Valley, this was the industrial heartland of Milwaukee. And one major industry there was tanneries. Pfister and Vogel was one of the largest. And you also had Trostel and Galoob along the Milwaukee River. So these were largely German establishments, and by 1890 they had made Milwaukee the largest tanner of leather on the planet. So this was really key to Milwaukee's economic growth. And they needed workers. And here they are kind of on the outer edge of Milwaukee. So industrial immigrants begin to arrive, especially the Poles. And the little settlement around Brady Street, some of you recall more from a different era, back in the 1960s. That began back in the 1860s as a center of industrial immigrants working at the riverfront industries. So there was actually open land between what's now sometimes called East Village and downtown. So it was kind of this outlier. And the second Polish church in Milwaukee is St. Hedwig's, on the corner of Humboldt and Brady. It goes back to 1871. And this is Pulaski Street, which is a filled-in ravine, and the building on the left there became Wolsey's Tavern. How many of you have closed Wolsey's? Well, they will admit it. How many of you have the bumper sticker? Fewer still. So it's certainly a prominent East Side institution. So St. Hedwig's goes back to 1871, second only to St. Stanislaus on the south side, which goes back to 1866, and it was a hub of an urban village. And people kind of set their watches to the chimes of the church tower clocks back in 1871 and later. So you have these very small homes and small businesses. This is a Wachahusky grocery store. It's not the Marquette basketball coach. And not too far away on Van Buren, just the incredible density these immigrant neighborhoods, especially the Polish neighborhoods, and you have these examples of what they called additive architecture, the Polish flat, begin with a cottage, raise it up, put a second unit beneath it. So you had incredible density here on Milwaukee's east side. And you have this contrast between the Polish settlement near the river and oriented toward those industries, where they had saloons serving as social centers and chickens and pigs in the backyard, just 2 or 3 blocks away from these mansions on Prospect Avenue. You know, the grand tour of Europe was kind of a birthright for the kids who grew up in those neighborhoods. People would commute back to downtown jobs at Northwestern Mutual and places by carriage. They would socialize at the Town Club, which was at one time on Barwell and Brady, so where the CVS pharmacy is. That was at one time the Town Club before they moved out to Fox Point. And so those contrasts couldn't have been much starker. And that was kind of a characteristic, that was a signature of Milwaukee's east side. So things kept on moving, and the wealthy families kept on moving up the lakeshore to a neighborhood called North Point. Now we're kind of heading north of here. Came up Prospect, made a hard right at Lafayette, and that's where North Point came from. And they found a couple of landmarks waiting for them. Among them was the North Point water tower that goes back to 1873. And all that's in there is a cast iron standpipe that was designed to relieve pressure from the pulsations of the water pumps. It was a very simple way of equalizing pressure on the mains. And Milwaukee uncharacteristically covered it, or sort of cloaked it, with this fairy tale castle. They haven't needed for that kind of relief for a very long time, but the tower is still there as a very cherished east side landmark. And right across the street, this is probably where that photograph was taken from, was St. Mary's Hospital, now part of Columbia St. Mary's. And that actually goes back to 1858, and they actually began downtown as St. James Infirmary. And the reason they moved out there was not necessarily because they needed land. Back in those days, hospitals were not where you went to get well. They were generally places where you went to die. And there was a civic committee that was formed when there were some contagious diseases downtown that were being taken care of, patients by St. Mary's. And they passed a resolution asking that the seat of pestilence be removed from downtown. So they moved all the way out to North Avenue, which was the edge of town back in those years. And obviously it's since grown to become a major institution in Milwaukee's healthcare establishment after merging with Columbia. Built back in the 1920s, David Adler was the architect. Faithful replica or version of a Mediterranean villa, kind of overlooking Lake Michigan. And when Mrs. Smith died, this was given to us, the people. So it's part of the War Memorial Center. And a great place to see decorative arts and a great place to get married. So it's really a very, very popular wedding venue. And the only one of those North Point mansions that is open to the public. So you keep on going and go to the Upper East Side, the area above North Avenue, kind of west of North Point. And this begins to develop in for the post-1910 or so. And again, they found landmarks waiting for them. Among them, the North Point Lighthouse that goes back to 1855. And like a Polish flat, it had to be raised off its foundation when the trees in Lake Park grew so tall that they blocked the light. So if you look at that lighthouse today, it's actually 2 different kinds of architecture. The windows are different in the lower level and the upper level. So they took off the original tower and stacked it on a new stanchion, a new pylon. So that's part of the Lake Park for a very, very long time. Lake Park itself goes back to 1890, and it was one of the first 6 purchased by the city, not the county, by the city back in 1890. And they were trying to drum up support, or trying to drum up interest in real estate out here, so the streetcar company would give concerts in Lake Park. So this was Sunday afternoon in Lake Park. Look at the size of those hats. Our ancestors were strong-necked women back in those years. So that was the lakeside, and you have these wonderful mansions. This is one of the E-line mansions built around World War I, and they keep on going up Lake Drive all the way into adjacent suburbs. On the riverside, the scene was a little different. So you had factories that were taking advantage of both the railroad tracks and the river. This is the National Brake Company, made locomotive brakes, and this is just south of Riverside Park. Do you know where Urban Ecology Center is? No, it's just behind these buildings. So you have kind of this movement of industry up the river bank from around that water power, and this became part of the major concentration of working class settlement kind of going up the river banks. And this is Locust Street, kind of in the more middle. You don't have the painfully small Polish flats you had back in the earlier decades, but more modest homes than you found on Lake Michigan. And in between, of course, there were institutions that served everybody. This is the Oriental Theater, opened Farwell just out the north back in 1927. And this was one of the last remaining atmospheric movie palaces that's still here, and newly the home of the Milwaukee Film Festival. This is good news to hear. And on the left there, that's where the Oriental Pharmacy is, or was. So and you'll see the patrons there immortalized in Adolf Rosenblatt's sculpture. And this attracted people from both the riverside and the lakeside. It was a place where everyone could meet to enjoy the latest in films. In the middle of the Upper East Side, between the river and lake, was a very anomalous land use, and that was golf. Back in 1894, some Milwaukee swells, there were some Marshalls and Hillsleys who went down to Chicago, among others, and got bit by the golf bug. Even though the snow was starting to fall, they laid out a very primitive golf course in a cow pasture that was bordered roughly by Downer, Oakland, Locust, and Hartford. Place that? It's kind of the southern half of the UWM's campus. So where the Union is, the people used to golf. They used tomato cans for cups. They used bamboo poles for sticks and bandanas for flags. So it was called pasture pool by some people who were not quite enamored of the sport. Fairly primitive, but this is the beginning of the Milwaukee Country Club. So they go back to 1895, a little bit north of their primitive first course, and they stayed there until 1911, when development of a different sort kind of pushed them out to River Hills, where they are to this day. And a lot of that push was provided by educational institutions. You have Milwaukee Downer College opening in Hartford and Downer back in 1899, and that grew out of the Milwaukee Female Seminary that was based downtown. This is now part of the most architecturally venerable and venerated section of UWM's campus today, and taken over when they merged Downer with Lawrence University up in Appleton. And just a block south, you have in 1909 the State Teachers College getting going. And many of you know this as Mitchell Hall, which is kind of the equivalent of Old Main for UWM. And back in 1956, when Wisconsin developed a really high-quality system of four-year colleges, a lot of that was based on the old normal schools, the old State Teachers College. So that was the origin of UWM, opened back in 1956 with roughly 4,400 students. Now it's got more than 25,000, so second only to Madison. And this, of course, is where Adolf Rosenblatt hung his hat and did his play for all those years from 1966 and on. So that's the east side, and you can see that contrast between the wealth and the working class persisting as development continues into the suburbs. Shorewood, 1900. You look at Wilson Drive, all those apartments on the west side, compare that with the mansions on Lake Drive. There's still kind of the patterns there. It kind of thins by the time you get to Mequon, but there are still vestiges of that pattern in the landscape as Milwaukee continued to move to the north and east. So that's Milwaukee's east side. There was a west side and an east side back in those early years, the south side being south of the Menominee River. And as the west side got bigger and bigger, they had to invent a north side to kind of squeeze in between. But early on, this was known as Milwaukee's west side. And that section was very different from Milwaukee's east side. The east side's pattern was contrast between the river and the lake. The east side's, or rather the north side's characteristic was more one large group after another, kind of settling in this unresisting geography and kind of moving up and out and being replaced by the next group through. So kind of this very slow sort of human conveyor belt of groups kind of moving from the older part of town, and as they move on, other people come in and replace them. The first group through was Germans, and they were Milwaukee's largest group by 1860. They were a majority of Milwaukee's population by 1860. And their first north side neighbor was Brewer's Hill, on the hill above the Schlitz Brewery. And that became, the brewery itself back in 1870 was second to Pabst for a time, but finally by 1900 they're kind of outgrowing. And Schlitz became not just the beer that made Milwaukee famous, but the #1 beer in the entire country for a time before Anheuser-Busch took off. So on the hill above this brewery, you had this mixture of some wealthy and some working class homes. Back in those years, people walked everywhere. So you had a lot of income diversity in some of these oldest neighborhoods. And the main commercial thoroughfare on Milwaukee's then west side, of course, was North 3rd Street. And Schuster's department store, run by a German Jewish family, was the purveyor of most everything back in those years. The building still stands on King Drive and Garfield. And back in those days, this was so intensely German that there are stories about people putting signs in their windows saying English spoken here, so that they would scare away the occasional non-German who wandered through. And I haven't heard it for years, but you can recall maybe as recently as the 1960s, sort of this fractured Milwaukee-ese syntax. And the famous line was always, "Meet me down by Schuster's where the streetcar bends the corner around." If someone hasn't done a t-shirt of that, they probably should or will fairly soon. The north side was also a place for recreation. The Pabst Brewery had its own in-town beer park. They went up in Whitefish Bay, the Whitefish Bay Resort, and had one on 3rd and Garfield called Pabst Park, a complete amusement park behind the beer garden. One of the rides was only attractions was a fun house called Katzenjammer Castle. I'd like to have seen that at some point. And this is now became Garfield Park, now it's Rose Park, a part of the county system and a center for African American seniors today. This was Borchert Field. How many of you have been to Borchert? A lot of you. So 1953 is when they stopped playing ball there, when the Braves obviously became our team at Milwaukee County Stadium. This was shoehorned into a single city block around 8th and Burleigh, and it was the home of the minor league Milwaukee Brewers for 50 years, from 1902 to 1952, and they were good, but they were minor leagues, so it was kind of an itch Milwaukee had to join the bigs. And you can see how short the power alleys are to right and left. So it was not uncommon for a pull hitter to put a ball through the living room window of somebody across the street, which is kind of an occupational or residential hazard of people who live there. And if you're going through I-43 today, around Burleigh, you're going right through the ghost of Orchard Field. And as Milwaukee kept on growing, you have continued growth in neighborhoods on Milwaukee's north side, and this is where they were digging foundations actually with steam shovels when they were run by steam, and before they were dump trucks, there were horses that took all that stuff away from the diggings. And the result was neighborhoods like Lindsay Heights, today as we know it, and Amani Metcalf Park. And as those Germans kept on moving on to the north and west, newer groups replaced them. And the next group through on Milwaukee's north side was Russian Jews, Eastern European Jews. Began to arrive back in the 1880s, and this is the Haymarket neighborhood, roughly west of the Schlitz Brewery up to about 12th Street, and from basically Walnut north to about North Avenue, or actually from Juneau up to about North Avenue. And this is Milwaukee in its pre-zoning phase. You could build anything, anywhere. You know, it was like putting land uses in a dice cup and kind of rolling them out on the landscape. So visual chaos. But this became, in 1882 and thereafter, the home of the Jews fleeing poverty and pogroms in the Russian Empire. They were called Russian Jews, but they were Lithuanian, Hungarian, Polish, Ukrainian, Belarusian, so a wide variety of cultures in what people would think of as a rather monolithic group. It was by no means. And by 1900, there were, in just a square mile here, there were 5,000 people and 12 synagogues. So this really was densely packed and religiously compact as well. And this was entry-level housing, to put it politely. Now, this was the third ward, which was Irish, was perhaps Milwaukee's first ghetto, but the Eastern European Jewish ghetto was second back in the 1880s and later on. But it became the foothold for immigrants who were seeking better lives in the New World. One of whom was a young woman named Goldie Matarez, who you know where this is going. Came here in 1906 at the age of 8. And she was the valedictorian. That's her on the far right side of this photograph. She was the valedictorian of the class of 1912. It was what was then the 4th District School. And that school is now named for her. No, it is the Golden Iron School for the gifted and talented. She became Israel's prime minister back in 1969 and probably the most famous ex-Milwaukeean ever. So she grew up here. This is where she was raised. This is where formative years were spent after the age of 8. So she is one heroine, and we have another in the Jewish community as well, and that is Elizabeth Black-Kander. Golda and Lizzie. Now that's a really powerful combination, and Milwaukee is lucky to have both. She came from a German Jewish family, actually from the south side, and she's the one who kind of bridged the gap between the established German Jews and the impoverished Eastern European Jews. And how she did that was starting something called the Settlement, which had a couple of different locations, but in 1900 moved to an old home on 5th and Garfield. And this was busy from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m., 6 days a week. They were just everything from a lending library to a savings bank to Yiddish newspapers. And perhaps the most novel feature is they were next door to the Young Brewery. And the brewery agreed to let them use kind of this waste steam to heat water for showers. So this is a time when indoor plumbing was not that common in Milwaukee or other U.S. cities. So the showers were a real draw there, especially in preparation for the High Holy Days. So this was really a beehive of activity and kind of the roots of the JCC, Jewish Community Center, of today. So she had a lot of programs, and they were not cheap to run. So one of her activities was cooking classes. And back in those days, you recall your grandmother's a pinch of this, pinch of that. You know, recipes were kind of unheard of. And she would codify, the ingredients and kind of the sequence in which they were added. So she and her volunteers decided to bind those into a cookbook called Settlement Cookbook, and that debuted back in 1901. And she went to her board and said, I've got this great idea for a fundraiser. It's going to cost $18 to print the first run of the Settlement Cookbook. Her board said, no, way too risky. So she went ahead and got underwriters. She got advertisers. They sold out their first edition quickly. And I'm not sure what edition they're in now. It has been certainly a runaway success for well over a century. And you can see the tagline there, a boon to the bride, a joy to the experienced housewife. And obviously the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. So that became the Milwaukee institution and helped to support the activities of the settlement and its original home there on 5th and Garfield. Other institutions in that old neighborhood were the Lapham Park Social Center, which was a public school affiliated institution, and generations of newcomers learned to speak English there. Now, this was kind of an extension school, so it was a place where you learned to learn civics, learn the English language, and kind of be socialized in a gentle way into American life. That's long gone, but that was a favorite institution. And there were others that the Jewish community itself began, and among those, the Mount Sinai Hospital goes back to 1903, Walnut and 4th, and it took over a building that had been a mansion, and then a home for unwed mothers and recovering prostitutes. They put those two together. And after that, a German YMCA. So they took it over in 1903, and this became certainly a major, an anchor of healthcare in Milwaukee, and it was described by its organizers as a gift of the Jewish community to the people of Milwaukee. It was also a place for Jewish physicians to practice who were not welcome to go on the staffs of the Christian hospital. So it had that very important impact, and not many years after they organized here in 03, moved to 12th Street, and now that is the last downtown hospital. That's it. Aurora Mount Sinai is the last of our downtown healthcare institutions. Walnut Street was a main commercial street, and in time you have more metropolitan goods and services being sold on 3rd Street, now King Drive. So it now had been a German downtown, is becoming a more polyglot downtown. And you can see his favorite establishments. You can just see the sign. What's that sign on the right? Rosenberg's. Rosenberg's was a favorite store. And Victor Gurda was next door. And some of you can see on the left side there, top of the picture, the Cole brothers. That was Max Cole, who was the founder of what became the biggest grocery store chain in the entire state of Wisconsin. So a lot of prosperity and widely shared prosperity on 3rd. So the beginning of that north side Jewish community, they kept on moving north and west. And they moved out from the Haymarket area, out 12th Street. And this is Beth Israel, which was Solomon Scheinfeld's congregation. They built this back in 1925 on Titonia, just north of North Avenue. This thing cost $250,000, which was a king's ransom back in 1925. Behind the shul here, they had a 10-room Talmud Torah school, so they were teaching the kids as well. So this is a real center of Jewish life. And also a point of transition. As the Jewish families kept on moving north and west, the next group through was African Americans. So you go from Jewish, or rather from German to Jewish to African American. And Beth Israel here is now Greater Galilee Missionary Baptist Church. And it's still in great shape. Just passed there this morning. And still well taken care of. And like all groups founded their own institutions, including churches like St. Mark's African Methodist, when it was on 4th, just north of Walnut. And they certainly, like all groups, tried to form their own institutions, but at the same time, they were not welcome to participate in other groups' activities. So that kind of reinforced this sense of both solidarity and segregation. Have their own athletic teams. This is the Urban League's team. The Urban League goes back to 1919, so they're coming up on a centennial in a couple of years. Have their own social service organizations. This is the YMCA, the High Y club on North Avenue. As you can see, sort of upstanding young men in an attic. So this was not prime facilities. And have their own businesses as well. This is the community drugstore on Walnut Street. Before that was widened and urban renewed. So a very cohesive, very coherent establishment, Milwaukee's near north side. And as time went on, they kept on moving, like the Germans, like the Jews, to the north and west. And for all groups, one of the real attractions was jobs in that corridor of industry along what's now North 30th Street, trying to revitalize that. But all the way from Miller Brewing all the way up to Cutler Hammer, which is probably 3 miles, and that was lined with factories. And the biggest was A.O. Smith right here, just south of Capitol Drive and west of 27th. At one time, that employed 9,000 people in that single complex. And they were the largest makers of car and truck frames in the entire world. By the years after World War II, they are integrating their workforce. This is the weld shop at Smith. And finally, you had a group that had kind of arrived here after surviving struggles in the South and finally getting union jobs in a union town. 1980s, the recession comes and really savages manufacturing. We lost a quarter of our industrial jobs between 79 and 83. So that was hard on everybody, but catastrophic for Milwaukee's minority community. The first zoning law is 1920. Before that time, it was just shuffled. After that, things looked pretty orderly. The setbacks are pretty uniform. Space between houses is pretty uniform. So the pride of the Sherman Park neighborhood was Grant Boulevard, Washington Boulevard, and in time 51st Boulevard. And this is where the Solochecks lived. See your house there? No? Is that somewhere in there? This is the Solochecks home where Steve spent his growing up years. And you have the main institution there was, of course, Washington High School. This is the meeting of the Alumni Association for Washington High School. How many are Washington alums? That's quite a few. That's quite a few. School goes back to 1915. Sherman Boulevard. It was run for decades by a Prussian named George Balzer, who was called the Czar by some of his students. And this was widely considered the best high school in Milwaukee. And Jewish families were very prominent in the student body here. Early on, people like Newton Minow and Abner Mikva, and more recently, people like Herb Cole and Bud Seelig, and a young man with curly hair named Jerome Silverberg, which we all know as Gene Wilder. He was a Washington grad, and more recently, Michael Pelton, what do you know, graduated from Washington as well. So a lot of power in Washington, and obviously a lot of pride. Don't all get that reaction when he shows slide in high school. So Washington was a real anchor of identity for Milwaukee Sherman Park neighborhood. And by the years after World War II, the Jewish population began to move up there in the 1920s, but it took until the Depression of World War II, you got to go through that ringer. And then after World War II, then you had a lot of the synagogues following their members out to the west side, Sherman Park. It was not called Sherman Park then. It was just the west side. You were a west sider or an east sider. Well, those are kind of the two distinctions. And this is Bethel. So they moved from 48th and Garfield up to Roosevelt and Sherman Boulevard back in 1951. You can see them with the Torah scrolls. So this became the center of Jewish worship in Milwaukee. And Synagogue Row had been along Cherry Street on the near north side. It became Center and Brilli in the Sherman Park neighborhood. So it's kind of a complete displacement. And the last Jewish congregation there, of course, is Beth Yehuda, which is Orthodox, the Tversky family, and all their congregants. So many other neighborhoods in Milwaukee. We haven't even touched the south side, but neighborhoods like Layton Park, Jackson Park, where I grew up, southeast side, Bayview, where I live now, and Tippecanoe. And it all adds up to a pattern of signs and theme of very, very obvious diversity. And you look at Milwaukee today and kind of this nutshell of Milwaukee looked at from the grassroots point of view. And it's the story of how our ancestors founded very different neighborhoods in very different parts of the city. And even though they lived their own lives, participated in the life of the larger community, the life of the whole, I believe it is on the neighborhood level, the grassroots level, that you see most clearly the unity and diversity that is Milwaukee's earmark, and certainly that makes urban life so interesting, and where you see the historical patterns that make life in the city so interesting. So Milwaukee is indeed a city of neighborhoods. I encourage you all to explore its abundant riches for yourselves.